Greetings, Mark Rang here, publisher of The Sun. And today my guests are candidates for the Conway Planning Board. Starting at the end is Chris Yarworth, A.O. Lucy, and Eliza Grant. How you guys doing?
Good.
Great.
Good. Good.
Beautiful day.
All right.
Yeah.
So it is a nice day. So I've got plenty of specific questions, but why don't we just start with like the basic is like why? Oh, I should say there are, these are the three candidates for 2 seats, 2 3-year seats, I think.
Yep.
So there's going to be 2 lucky winners and someone who's going to try again next year. All right. So Chris, why are you running?
Well, I'm the newcomer here, so I think I got 2 lifers from Conway. I moved here end of 23. I have a background in civil and environmental engineering, land surveying. I ran my own company for 30 plus years. When I retired from that, I became a director of planning and development for a similar community of 10,000, and I was also the conservation agent there. So I think I started working in engineering when I was 14. So I've got a long background in it. It's what I'm interested in. I've been a member of a planning board in my past community and the conservation commission in my past community in Rentham, Mass. It's kind of just what I like. When I retired, as you wouldn't know, but it gets a little boring sometimes. You can only get in so much of a good shape, doing sports and working out. So I volunteered as a associate on the ZBA. And I think that was the middle of 24. There were 3 associates at the time, so I really wasn't seeing too much action there. So I volunteered for the planning board, and they've put me to work a little more since then. So I've had a year and a half, year and 3/4 of experience as an associate on the planning board, which has been fun. It gets me to know the community, know the people, know the problems. I like to participate in town things, trying to make the town better, and I'm enjoying it. And so I signed up.
Good.
To run, and
Ayo,
we'll see what happens.
we don't have to go into the Lucy history from the 1700s.
Yeah, please. Please, no. I'm just doing it because I lived in another state for a long time. I was born and raised here. And, way over into Maine, 6 miles away or something. And chaired the planning board in the 80s. And into the 90s in Brownfield, and then I moved to Freiburg and was on that planning board for a few years. So planning board stuff I know. Tried to stay away from civil service for a while, and so.
And you believe in books.
I run Believe in Books right now, and live over on the West Side Road, and then I'm a very happy resident right next to Diana's Baths, so there's a whole bunch of stories that go with that. So planning is important. I know the business, and I care about this town. We've been here for over a couple 100 years, and
1700s.
yeah, and my family has done its best, my generation included, to preserve land. And so we care about the land because they're not making it anymore. So I thought this would be a good place for me to contribute to the town. So that's why I'm here. I have no agenda. I don't, but I have the experience and I have the care, and so I thought I'd better get started in helping the town.
Liza.
Yeah, I'm Eliza Grant. I'm the incumbent presently. I'm actually not a lifer. I was not born here. But I have lived here now for I think 9 or 10 years, and I love it here. This is my second, I think, time running for planning board, and I've been involved in the master plan update that we've done, and been involved in the process to this point of updating zoning, and we have a consultant that's going to help us do that in the next couple of years. So that project is really important to the whole planning board and to the town, and is going to give us a chance to really take a look at, what exactly do we want for regulations, how are we going to make our vision for the town into rules that are fair for everybody and that make sense, hopefully make zoning more accessible for everybody in terms of really understanding how it works and how do we make it serve us, So doing that is really important to me, and doing it well. So
Okay.
put my name back in.
I've been around long enough to see the planning boards change, and when it's when we're in a period of growth, it tends to be more restrictive planning boards, and then when we're in a recession, it tends to be more lax. So I guess a general philosophical question of, is your approach, what is your approach to planning in general? Is it more controlling growth or to expedite business, or where's your, as a general approach, Eliza?
So something that has always struck me about our current zoning code in Conway that I think people who don't look at the code maybe wouldn't realize is that the code as it's written right now and as it has been written for a long time actually doesn't align well with what we have for existing development, especially historical existing development. So I think I've said this at planning board meetings before, our villages are not zoned as mixed use. You couldn't rebuild, the way our current zoning is written, you couldn't rebuild or build new anything in our current villages. And our current villages, you know, have a lot of economic development and businesses. They have new businesses, especially in North Conway Village. So I don't think that changing zoning, for example, to fit what we have there now and what we want to see there is necessarily going to be restrictive or have a negative impact from a growth perspective. I actually would really like to get away from the idea that we're somehow like managing like economic development or like business development with zoning. Like zoning is really just like, how do we want the physical buildings to look and sit in the environment? And any business can be in those buildings. Certainly there's some types of businesses that may or may not fit on some smaller lots, smaller businesses, et cetera, smaller buildings. But I think there's a way to do like a nice middle ground zoning that's not, you know, benefiting a big box store type development, but that's also not necessarily benefiting other specific types, you know.
All right, so we'll get into some specifics, but AO, sort of a philosophical approach?
Yeah, I don't have anything in particular, I guess, aggressive or non-aggressive. You know, the town of Conway has been playing catch-up with all kinds of ordinances and whatnot, because back in the 60s, there was a fellow whose last name was the same as mine, tried to get zoning through, and at the time that was an insane thought. And it was voted down. And I think even the next year, maybe it was tried again and didn't.
This is Chet you're talking about.
Yeah, that would be my father. And my uncle, Thad Thorne, also was a selectman in that era, and he also tried to get zoning in. So it got voted down. Nobody wanted anybody to tell them what to do with their land. It's an old, it's an old argument.
We call that Tamworth now.
And so we missed it. And so since then, there's been all these ordinances over time that have just tried to mitigate what's happening right then. And that's not planning.
So you're more interested in the plant? I guess what I was asking.
I'm interested in long term. I'm interested in the long term.
Not necessarily being restrictive. I guess what I'm really asking is that how much. I mean, we all, you know, we had the hotel moratorium for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And we can get into that, but I guess so. You're more interested in the long-term planning, and just in planning. Zoning actually went in, I think, in 1980. I think it was
Okay.
that was there, and before then, you could just do anything everywhere.
Pretty
And
much.
I think what you're talking about, Eliza, is that you could have like the villages are half commercial and residential, and now you can't. You're either commercial or you're although
Yeah.
you can build in residential and commercial, right? I think you can do that. Like if you want to put
You
a
can build residential
and
and
a commercial.
commercial, yes.
but I think
not the other way
part
around.
of the new zoning is to encourage a mixed use. Is that
Yeah.
true? Yeah.
And the
So-
scale that we want.
Yeah.
So in looking down the road, we don't know what the future holds. You know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you couldn't have guessed what was going to happen this year. And it's going to be the same forever. So my view is just really important to know that we are just here for a short term on this planet, and we need to think about future generations and future use of the property that we have and have any control over. So I don't know that that answers your question, but that's kind of how I look at it.
Okay, so it's a pretty wide open question, so maybe it's not totally appropriate. But Chris, are you in a restrictive mode, or let's open the guns and let the business come in mode?
I think, number one, the town's just gone through a master plan process where everybody has had a chance to speak, and I believe came to, and it was a little before my time, but somewhat of a consensus as to what they want the town to look like. And I think most people feel the town is overdeveloped, at least along the Route 16 corridor, and is starting to become overly trafficked and overly congested in places. So I think that needs to be looked at. Now, that doesn't mean I'm against growth, but just to further sound like I am, I've come from communities where the town just gets eaten up and eaten up and eaten up, and the hiking trails and the walking trails slowly start vanishing, the connectivity starts vanishing, the open space, will be here, and then there'll be all of a sudden development in it. That just tends to grow over time. I think, like you were alluding to, and eventually you lose that sense of community. The water gets dirty. Those things need to be addressed, and I think that's why the master plan was started, and why the zoning now is going to be put in place. But I also have worked for developers for most of my life, so I think as a person who's worked for developers, you want to have a clear set of rules. You want to have a fair set of rules. You want people to be able to make profit from the money they've invested in over the years, and they need to be able to get answers. So there's nothing more frustrating than going before a planning board and just getting zigzagged all over the place and not getting direction. What this board does well, I think now, they have the conceptual review, so you can come in early and talk without spending a lot of money. They have an excellent planner and planning staff that works with people, and especially smaller people. What you don't see a lot of times with planners and planning boards is if the smaller person comes in, they don't get any help. And I've noticed in my year and a half here that at least Ryan tends to work for the big developers, but he also helps out the citizens in town. So I think we need to protect what we have, make sure it doesn't go away, but make the process so it's not controversial or adversarial, that you have a clear set of rules. And that's what the zoning is going to be. And that's a lot of technical work, which I've got some background in. I'm not going to say I'm an expert in New Hampshire rules, but that needs to be locked in now for the next phase, so that I think everything can move forward. So I'm neither for or against. I want things to be clear for businesses, so it's good, but I want to preserve what we have in town, and I think that why people move here, that has to be preserved too.
All the ordinances are being rewritten, right?
Yes.
The whole
Zoning,
code will be
zoning.
rewritten, but rewritten meaning definitely will be restructured, and some pieces will be rewritten. They're probably going to keep many ordinances, but they may get moved into places where it's more clear. The way that our zoning, even just high level, is set up right now is not great. It's repetitive in a way that I personally think is confusing. So it's probably going to get restructured regardless. I think there's definitely going to be substantive changes, but I don't necessarily think they're going to change every single thing.
Okay, when you say they, it's a consultant.
The consultant.
The consultants are going to make recommendations
so
to us based on what we tell them we want.
From a layperson's perspective, basically our zoning ordinances, which have kind of grown, every once in a while you'll see something on the article and then the town warrant to vote for. They're kind of haphazard.
Yes.
So this is really trying to codify everything
Yes.
into something that's a more professional, right?
Yes.
But in the meantime, the planning board proposed this growth ordinance thing that kind of went to the wayside. And that was going to be like for 3 years, correct?
Yeah, I mean, so basically it started with the hotel moratorium, which was largely supported by the voters and ultimately was decided by the voters. And when that was set to expire, because there's a 2-year statutory maximum on that, so when that was set to expire and we were not going to re-up it, we did have the conversation of, is there a different growth management mechanism we should utilize that is available to us until zoning gets done, right? Because what you don't want to see when the planning board is working really hard to redo zoning, which is a massive project, even with consultants, is a huge amount of work for all the staff and the planning board members. What you don't want is also a massive rush of everybody trying to get their application in and loading up every meeting with 5-10 applications that are complicated because they're like, well, the rules might change, so let me get this in right now. So I think that logic is sound, but I think that ultimately when we looked at what it would involve, it did not make sense, and the feedback was negative from the public, and
Right.
we take that seriously.
Right, and I think part of it is it was seemed very restrictive, like no curb cuts on Route 16. There was like 100-year, you had to have management 100 years. Basically, it was going to stop most development for 3 years, and there was pushback. So, and I think the developers or people in the development world are concerned about it, that some of those features could be put into the zoning going forward.
It's completely different than what zoning is.
Okay, so that's gone, but so you guys can chime in on that, on a growth ordinance. Was that something you would have favored? I mean,
So is that gone completely, Eliza, at this point, you think?
Yeah, because it would have had to be on the warrant if we were going to move forward, and it did not get put on the warrant because of the feedback that we received. But it is legally very complicated, and honestly, one of the reasons that I said I was not necessarily interested in pursuing it at this point was, yes, on one hand, the negative feedback that we received from the community, but on the other hand, that would be a very complicated technical document, and I do think a reality is that we have excellent staff right now, but they are not robots. They work there Monday to Friday, and most of them are working more hours than they're paid to be there anyway. So I just think asking them to dedicate a huge amount of their time to something that did not seem to have great popular support and would have needed a lot more work to move forward just didn't feel like the right choice
so that,
to me personally.
it's kind of gone. Chris, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, it didn't happen, so.
So I'm glad we had the hearing on it, number one, because I think that was probably the biggest turnout we had at a planning board meeting since I've been there. And there were a lot of people, mostly realtors, but we got a lot of input, which is good to get, whether it's in favor of what you're doing or not. I think it's nice to hear from people, and the business community was there in force, made their point very clear, and made a lot of good points. And I think the board took it to heart and dropped it. But as far as your second part of your question was, do you think any of those things will come forward in the future? I think they may, some of them. Some of the, again, the issues with the congestion and the number of curb cuts on Route 16 are valid issues. And if there's a better way to handle those, and they come through either through zoning or site plan or subdivision review or some of those other regulations, I think the board should look at them, again, subject to public review. But that Route 16 strip is congested. It needs to have some thought put into it. It's kind of late now. Maybe nothing can be done, but you certainly don't want that expanding down some of the other areas of town that are maybe a little less built up. So there are ideas that I think should be looked at. And again, the idea is to have good planning going forward. It's not to stop people from developing their property. It's not to tell people what kind of businesses to have. But there's no harm in the community setting forth a set of regulations that try and guide it in a direction that'll be a little better than what we've seen.
Dale, I think Sean Bergeron, one of the reasons why he was against the whole thing was that he didn't think the process was right, and that we have to develop a capital improvements plan first, right? So you are developing a capital improvements plan. So AO, now I think of capital improvements, I think of sewer, I mean extending the sewer line, and I guess roads. So maybe, so what do you think about capital improvement? Well, what are capital improvements that you see in this town?
At this point, we're, as I said before, we've been playing catch up for 30 years now, and that's not going to stop. And sure, we need a capital improvements plan. We also need a lot of things, and so we can go out there and try to work a future plan, like capital improvements or something. But we're still living today, and there are still going to be things coming in the next year or the next month. So it's a task. I mean, there's no question. We really have to be working on the far end and the near end at the exact same time, and staff does a wonderful job right now. We're really lucky, but they're limited. There's only so much time in the day. So I don't have a plan, even though I'm interested in planning, but they both have to be done at the same time somehow.
But how does one reconcile? I mean, I think we're all interested in control, having whatever happens to have it controlled and done right. But if part of the capital improvement plan is to extend the sewer line, right, by definition, that means more commercial development or more development. right? So how does one reconcile, or anything we do in a world of infrastructure either encourages more business or more people?
I mean, I think there's two pieces to capital improvements. One is that, yes, but the other piece is just having a collection place and a tally and a ranking of what are the things we really need done that are big, expensive things. Like, this is not somebody's going to go out on a Wednesday and fix XYZ, right? This is like a major project that needs planning, might need bonding. Pedestrian safety and wayfinding is going to go into that bucket, which is a really big, important one right now. And those projects are certainly less expensive than some of those other infrastructure projects like water, sewer, road improvements, but they're still expensive. There are still things that we need to plan for. So I think on one hand, we could probably all come up with 10 things to go on a capital improvements list right now with no further growth, right? But yes, ultimately that is going to become the place where we put projects that are going to be involved with growth. But I think the bigger road, water, sewer projects, before they even get to the level of saying, okay, this project is going on the capital improvements list, there's going to be a lot of pre-engineering that needs to happen and public input that's going to need to happen to actually decide where that's going to go and what that's going to look like. But I think most of the water and sewer people in town would say, like, water and sewer is really for environmental protection. It doesn't exist for the purpose of growth. It exists for the purpose of environmental protection, period.
Because they don't have septic systems then.
Correct,
right.
correct.
Yeah.
And because water, is controlled and tested and everything that's going into people's homes and businesses. So I do think that it's important to keep in mind that, yes, we should plan for growth and what growth we want to see with water and sewer expansion. But that is not the point of water sewer expansion. And ultimately, water and sewer expansion is for environmental protection, which I think is probably one of the issues that almost every single person in this town could get on the same page about, right? Environmental protection in this town, the natural resources that we have, and preventing contamination of those resources with water, the river, the aquifer being a really big one that I haven't ever had someone, like, I hear a lot of viewpoints. I don't think I've ever had someone tell me they're not worried about water quality.
I mean, it is
on some level.
Again, it's sort of tough to reconcile. Like, if I think the logical, they're talking about extending the water sewer in Lower Bartlett up by you guys, on past Glen, but also down into East Conway, right?
East Conway or Center Conway, and as far as I'm aware, that decision has not been made.
But even if it goes to, let's say you go down by Redstone, right? Because it stops, I think, at the Walmart, right?
Yep.
Yeah, the Ridge Line. So, okay, so you clean up a couple septic systems on the way there, but then you encourage giant hotels, which in terms of the environmental impact of having a giant hotel there,
that's where zoning
insolvable.
has to decide.
Yeah. Right.
Because zoning can prevent a hotel from going there because it can prevent uses in different districts. And we could redistrict that area. But that's really up to the public. This is going to be so important. Whoever's on the planning board, if you have if you're the public and you have a really strong opinion of what kind of zoning goes in any location, it doesn't have to be exactly where you live, then you need to show up and say, I think Redstone needs its own zoning district. I think Interville needs its own zoning district, whatever. And then I think this or that shouldn't be allowed in that zoning district. The reason a lot of time growth goes with infrastructure is because infrastructure is expensive and you're not going to put in $100 million of infrastructure for 100 homes, right? That doesn't make sense. But I also think, depending on where there's sensitive parts of the aquifer, resources like the police station and other things that really should have access to water and sewer, that's a component of that decision. I think that that's where you have to kind of get into the details and really talk about not just like zoning as a concept, but like, where does this zone go and what do we allow there?
All right, Chris, what do you think about capital improvements and what should our priorities be?
So I just want to come back to the water in Lower Bartlett you just talked about, because that came up recently. And one of the things, they're worried about the water quality, and it brings up what Eliza was just saying. You've got the existing wells, you're concerned about the water quality upstream, so you put the sewer in. That's for environmental protection. And the issue I brought up with, and it ties into what you asked for, it says you need to have zoning protection at the same time. So you can't just put in the sewer, hook up the buildings that are there, and then 10 years later have the whole area redeveloped densely and have to replace the sewer again with another cost because you've done it. So, but if you apply density zoning at the same time in that area that needs to be protected, you're doing a two-phase approach to solving the problem. You do the infrastructure improvement for the environment, you do the overlay zoning or whatever so that those projects that don't tie in or that come in the future meet a standard that isn't going to overbear the aquifer that you're trying to protect. So the two have to work hand in hand, and whether one comes first or the other comes first, I think the town needs to work together to get both of them done. And that's the same argument I would make in Redstone that Eliza was making. You know, the police station may need sewer, things by the Saco may need sewer, they may be an environmental thing, but if you don't do the zoning as well, you're going to run into problems. And that can be, if, for instance, things like if you don't tie into the sewer for some reason, then you can only have so much of a density. So if somebody wants to put 1 or 2 homes in there, that's not going to overly burden the aquifer. You can go ahead and do that. But if they're going to put in a 100-unit hotel, then they're going to have to make improvements. So they're going to have to make sure that the utilities are adequate. And there's going to be an expense to that. So I think the public doesn't have to bear all those expenses. Those should be in large part, or in most part, paid for by some of the new businesses that want to come in. We shouldn't be footing the bill for new businesses. They should be paying their own way as they go forward. And you can do that if you work together. And it's not easy, it's not simple, but it's an approach that I think the town should take as they go forward.
Okay. So we'll give the planning board its due by saying you're working under sort of difficult circumstances as a hodgepodge of ordinances, right? Yeah. Let's say. And they're being rewritten or codified, whatever you want to say. But how much power should the planning board have specifically? So for instance, like with the Indigo Hotel, I mean, the planning board said, no, you can't have a 4th floor. I think you just so they're basically not arbitrary decisions, but the planning board has demonstrated a lot of power by saying we get Steve Porter, and Steve Porter's a great quote machine because he says what everybody thinks in about 4 words. So when he's up there on the Ledgewood potential development, he says, it's too big. Headline, it's too big, right? But that's a subjective decision. So you have a developer that comes in. Indigo's an example. Ledgewood is where, hey, according to the regs, this is what they can do. They get to the planning board and all of a sudden, oh no, we don't like that, basically, blah, blah, blah.
I mean, I think those two are very different. And I should say that for Hotel Indigo, I was actually an abutter. I'm not a direct abutter, but I was a neighbor for that. I was not sitting on the board. And the 1-story reduction that occurred with that hotel was a specific request that was placed by the neighbors. And we actually had a lawyer and provided legal justification for why that fit criteria of the ordinances to prevent nuisance, property value reduction, and other things that are in the code. So that was something that the planning board voted, and again, it was not me, I was in the neighbors group. The planning board voted basically to accept and impose that limit based on the neighbor's nuisance complaint request. So that was very specific. I mean, Ledgewood is still in the process of coming forward, but I think the concerns there are more about the wetlands, the road ownership. They're not, the neighbors are, I think, justifiably concerned about size, but I think a lot of the planning board concerns actually have to do with the land and the parcel itself. You know, there's a lot of wetlands, there's a vernal pool, there's a wildlife corridor through there, and it would be a very large development on a dead end that's up a steep hill and has no other exit.
Right, and I'm not trying to,
Yeah.
and I'm not trying to ask you to justify what
Yeah.
the planning board
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
and I think
No,
they're
it's
all
fine.
good reasons.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm really getting at, AO, is how much power should the planning board have for waivers? I mean, you get a waiver here, you get a waiver there, someone doesn't, your market basket, you're able to have a giant sign.
Well, interesting. The experience I've had on 2 different planning boards, the planning board has had a lot of power in those towns, and I think conventionally they do. And there are rules and regulations that you follow, and you do the best you can with that. But at some point, some human element has to come into there, and the reality of today. And I think that the planning board should have that power. I mean, how else would you do it other than have a hearing for every little thing, which is not only time consuming, but the world continues to grow around us. So somebody's got to have the final say on some things based on what the public has inferred all along. And the other thing I wanted to say was that as far as expanding the sewer and water and whatnot, you know, it's going to happen sooner or later. We got to go to Redstone, we got to go to Glen and all those things. And, you know, those are realities that I think when we're doing all of these things, and you've seen a lot, it sounds like, as growth happens, we just somehow have to keep that in mind also, you know, whether it's zoning or whatever tries to not restrict, but to guide as we go along. That's the tough part of the planning board.
I mean, you think the planning board now, I'll put you on the spot here, grants too many waivers in general?
I think they have granted waivers that should not have been granted. I won't say too many, but sometimes we're not thinking enough ahead. And I think the planning board right now I've seen it evolve over the last few years, just a handful of years, and I think they're much more responsive and responsible than what I had seen even 5 years ago. So I'm really pleased with that. And
Chris, what do you think about waivers?
kinda how it
I
has to
have
happen.
a bunch of comments, and I'm trying to just keep them all in
love
in
it.
mind here.
Here, can I
The
get your
first,
pad of
the
paper?
first, I need a pad of paper to write down my comments because I'm over here. Number one, the power issue, which you brought up, and you brought that up in some of your articles in your own paper, I think. The planning board is power hungry. The power comes,
I don't think we've used that term. but
well,
go ahead.
you use, I think it was, is the planning board going to be kings, no kings? I don't know what your headline was, but
I'm going to write that down.
but the-
Power hungry planning board.
but the power comes from the people. I mean, and the power is only there that we get given to us at town meeting by the people. So when you say they're taking too much power, they're either given it or they're not given it. They can't take it per se. The articles are written under the zoning, and you have to follow them. And if you don't follow them, then you go to the zoning board. Now, site plan and other things give you the power to have waivers. I'm a big fan of waivers. I've worked in towns where again, the rules have not changed in tune with the times. So you'll have a 1950s set of subdivision plans or a 1960s set of site plans. And when somebody comes in with 30-foot roads and 2-foot sidewalks on both sides for a 4-lot subdivision, that's nuts. You don't need to see that amount of asphalt. You don't need to see how much of impervious area. You need to have the flexibility to do it. And you don't have time to change these rules all the time necessarily and keep up. So if there's an ability to grant a waiver and you can get a better design, I think the board should do it. There should be a public benefit. There should be an environmental benefit. It shouldn't be given willy-nilly. But if you have that option, I mean, you elect people to think. And if you're not going to let them think and you're not going to let them do what's right, then vote them out. It's the same as the article that came before the town last year with 400 square foot of impervious area. You know, you have to go to a town meeting to vote to have 400 square foot down the town. I mean, if you don't let your selectmen vote and think and do their job, it's not going to get done. So I really am in favor of giving the board some flexibility to do what they want. If you don't
More
like us,
power.
vote us out. I mean, you probably won't vote me in anyways. Everybody knows you guys. I'm new to town, so what do I know? But,
Hey,
but,
hey,
but I'm not opposed to waivers
Lucy
at all.
is like being a Sununu in
I'm
this
just
town.
going to say, I asked his brother if he was going to run specifically. I said, I'm not going to run against somebody that knows 99% of the people in town. So I know, like, if I get 12 votes, I'll be happy. I mean,
Well, you'll probably get more than that.
Yeah.
Hey, Rob, could you bring up the photo of the bank? So this is one of those good questions.
I knew I
Of
should
course,
have
my
worn
job
glasses.
is just to challenge you guys. Remember that.
Oh no,
I
not
should have worn my
this.
glasses.
Okay, so this is the TD Bank proposed down in where the TD Bank is now by a corner by Burger King, and I think in the zoning it says New England or mountain town ambiance
Yeah.
for standards. Now that ain't New England, but it's certainly
It's a mountain.
It's a mountain. It's certainly out west, and it looks like REI. But I think that was shot down by the planning board.
No, I hated it, and I got shot down by the rest of the board who let it through.
Really?
And it was approved. They just didn't want to build it. And the Mountain Town edit to the zoning, I believe actually, or to the site plan review comment, I think came after that design, because I said it's not New England and that's what the code said, but everybody else said, well, we allow designs that like that all the time, which I don't disagree with that statement. We do allow designs that look like that. And I actually think the Mountain Town language got added to be more clear that the designs like the REI building are okay. I hated that design, but which
This
is
one.
me personally, and I said it in the meeting. But I said, if I'm the only one that doesn't like this, that's fine with me. I'm one person; it's a 7-person board. But that was an approved design. They chose not to build that.
Okay. Ao, what do you think? And Chris, or Ao, I'll start with you.
I would
mean,
love for someone else to say they don't like it, but I don't care. I don't actually care, but it would be
Well,
funny.
I will, plain and simple, it's terrible. And there have been a lot of allowed structures built in this place in the last 10, 15 years even that are certainly not New England. However you want to define New England, they're not New England. I mean, there's not one hotel here that looks like anything to do with New England.
I mean, to do it all over, you'd have the whole strip be New England style?
Yeah, I'd bulldoze everything, start all over again.
Plant some trees.
Just trees.
Trees, green.
Okay, well, that's another.
Trees are very
That's another thing,
original,
but,
original landscape.
Yeah, no, that's terrible, and I think that whoever we is, zoning, the ZBA and the planning board have let the New England look grow into some monster.
But we're already, I mean, we are where we are, right? So,
Yeah.
Chris,
Oh yeah.
I mean, we got REI and the Settlers Green. The Settlers buildings don't look. I don't know how you guys approved all the Settlers stuff because that's certainly not New
Yeah,
England.
me neither.
I mean,
Me
most of that came before even me. I mean, I've been on the board I've been on the board 4 or 5 years
I
at
mean, we
this
can't
point.
blame you for
I was
everything.
going to say, what
You,
can
I
we
mean,
blame
you're
you for?
you're welcome to blame me for whatever you want. I certainly don't care. But I think the only Settlers buildings that I have sat for are the Meredith Village Savings Bank building, which I think is nice and arguably New England style, and the whatever they keep bringing to us and redesigning to sit in the parking lot near Market Basket that has not been built. I think those are the only two in the last like 4 years.
Yeah, Chris, what do you think? I mean, I mean, if we're putting our personal opinion, like I don't have a problem with that design. I mean, it looks like the Strip, and I don't think they're ugly buildings. They're just not New England-y. I don't know. That's why we have the villages and all that. What do you think about? Would you approve that design?
So number one, when it comes to architectural stuff, I turn to Eliza all the time. I just want to say, I didn't mean to be running against Eliza because I think she does a wonderful job on the board, and she does a great job. And when I signed up, there was only 2 of us going, so I'm sorry if I'm running against you. I'm not running
Well,
against
if one
her.
of you guys wants to
So there you
step
go.
back, this is the time to do it.
So she comes up all the time with these architectural reviews, and she does a great job with that. So thank you for that, because I think it's well worth spending the time to do it. I do not want to be architectural police. You're right. The lower part of Route 16 is a hodgepodge of a mess. Do I like that building? Not particularly. Does it kind of fit in with what's there? Sort of.
Okay, well, let me ask it this way then. Going forward, would you approve other buildings on the Strip that don't look New England-y?
I think what we should be doing is diversifying the Strip to different areas. And I think that's one of the problems that's happened in the past. You've had the North Conway Village has had the same zoning as everything else. And there's clearly 2 different zones there, and they need to be rewritten so that things that are suitable for the southern part are not the same as the northern part. And going north, there needs to be another section there too. So I think that's part of what the new zoning should be doing, is looking at those areas a little more specifically and coming up with stuff that's reasonable for what's there now. We obviously can't go back in time. That building on certain parts of 16 would be okay, on other parts it wouldn't be. And I think that we need to protect what we have to and allow a little more discretion in other areas, if that makes sense.
Ao, would you allow more of those type of buildings, even if you don't like them on the Strip, because they're?
No.
So what are you really saying?
And the excuse all along can be, well, we allowed this, so we're doing this, and it's gotten to that building you just showed. That's how it got there.
Yeah, it's a rabbit
So
hole.
we didn't go back to the beginning and say New England. We just said, oh, well, here's a precedent right here. We'll do this, and each one successively gets worse, and so that's tough.
I mean, people say, what do you think about historical zones? Like with North Conway Village, and I know they in liberal Portland they wanted to make something historical, but it turns out once you make it historical, it gets way more expensive. Like people have to conform.
Yeah,
it's
true.
exclusionary. So the liberal Portland City Council didn't create a historical zone. or district? I mean, do you think that's fits here? I mean, it seems logical because we have real villages.
I think it just depends on how you do it, because there's a difference between, like, we could just decide in zoning these specific zones we are just calling them, like, these are historic, and the zoning we're putting forth for them is designed to preserve, you know, their appearance and feel. There's a difference between doing that and putting a block or a village on the National Historic Register, which does come with a lot of restrictions. And I'm sure fulfilling those restrictions is very expensive. They're still limited to a degree in what they can control and ask for, but I think there's different levels of doing that. I do think we need to be saying what are our, you know, maybe lowercase h historic areas in town that we want to put effort into preserving. And I think we need to, instead of them just being like the 3, 4, 5 places that pop into everyone's head, I think it should be written down, right? We all agree these places have historic value, and it is a goal to preserve that, and we should probably have some additional rules that address that. But that doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're checking your paint color with someone in Washington, D.C., which can happen with historic districts or historic homes.
What do you think about that? I mean, I think we're fortunate, like we have, I mean, the people, like Alec Tarberry, he owns a lot of buildings in North Conway, just bought the 5 and Dime. He's very interested in preserving it. Do you think the town needs to codify historic districts or let the market work? Unfortunately, we have people who are in the real estate business who are interested in preserving.
Yeah, I don't know that it has to be historic, but I like the idea of different zones, a village zone per se, both for Conway Village and for North Conway. It's not a bad idea, with its own guidelines of sorts. And again, not paint color or anything that restrictive, but you know, I think it's a smart idea. Why not?
All right, Chris, any thoughts on those kind of zones?
Well, I think I already
Yeah.
referenced, I think we need different zones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the big issue. I don't want to add unnecessary bureaucracy to people. And what I do find, I've lived in the town and I've worked in the town. Both very similar, under, you know, just under 10,000. And in both cases, the downtowns were revitalized because the local business community got together, they worked together, and they renovated buildings sort of in conjunction. And like you said, with the Tyrese and other people in the Plainville where I work, there's Jeff Kinney, who writes the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books. I don't know if it's after my age kids, but he lives in town. He's ripped down the whole downtown. He's rebuilding it. But you get local businessmen come together. They work. You don't need to be throwing roadblocks in front of people that are trying to make the town better. You need to give a framework so that things don't get worse, but you certainly don't need to make life difficult for people, because it's hard enough to get these small town centers going. You have to be, I think, thankful that people want to step up and take over these businesses and work at them, and it's not an easy job, and you got to be understanding of what they're doing. So I kind of, that's my opinion there.
Well, we can't talk about zoning without talking about signs. Everybody likes to talk.
Oh,
And we won't relitigate the donut sign. That was really a town issue. But what about the signs? And the mural, part of that whole litigation thing was the mural, whatever that was, ordinance kind of went away, right? But there was some language in that the mural part said does not distract from a mural from the character of the surrounding area, which is totally subjective if you're anybody. So what are your thoughts on, one is that grandfather that everybody thinks, well, just take down the old signs. Well, you can't, right? You can't
No,
take
you
down
can't.
so like this big Staples sign, which used to be Barnaby's and all that kind, you can't take those down. And AO and I are probably the only ones who know about Barnaby's. But what do you think about signs, Chris?
Can I pick on you again?
You sure can.
This is fun. So one of the things, signs are a pain in the neck, and I would have said another word, but I can't. But for instance, the giant flag. When you did the teletalk on the giant flag,
I mean the one that was proposed for Senator Conway.
Yes, for Senator Conway. I mean that just brings up the issue. You know, is the zoning board voted against the American flag flying over Conway Village? You know, or are we all a bunch of communists? And my answer to that is under the new federal laws and the Supreme Court rulings, is that flag could show anything. We can't legislate what's on the flag. So it's not an American flag. It's, do you want a 40 by 80 flag flying over there that could show anything? Because we can't regulate it. And that's the problem that none of the sign bylaws have wrapped their heads around right now. Whatever you put up, we can regulate size, we can regulate location, but we can't regulate what necessarily what goes on that sign. Because people have a right of political free speech. And therein lies the rub. I think we should be concentrating ourselves on location, size, number of signs, and things like that. You're never going to get it right. There's a process to go to the ZBA if you need to fix something that seems unjust, and that pops up every once in a while. You're not going to get a correct answer out of me on what to do with signs.
So you're saying we should just restrict it to the nuts and bolts of a sign. I mean, you can't legislate the free speech, which was the donut issue. And I always remind people, even though it was a quote unquote First Amendment lawsuit, it wasn't a First Amendment lawsuit. I mean, if I put something on the front of this building or the giant newspaper, I'm sorry, that's a sign. If you put a donut in front of your building, chances are you're a bakery. And so that lawsuit was settled on the enforcement of the sign. It wasn't so much, and the judge said, I'm not making a decision on whether it's a real sign or not. But anyway, hey, what about signs? So can we get rid of them, or do you want to get rid of them, or should they be more restrictive?
I won't tell a story about when I was in high school and what we did with billboards, but
no, we'll leave that for another. Unless you brought a six-pack, we'll leave that.
That's a different show.
That's a different show. I think signs have to be regulated, not in content, but in size and shape.
How do you deal with the market baskets, though, when that sign, obviously it's a huge building, and it would be funny if there was a 40-square-foot sign in the front of that building.
Well, I don't care if you're asking about that particular thing. When that building was built and the developers put that in there, they knew what the story was. They knew how far it was from the road and all that. So for them to get the ability to double the size of that sign or whatever happened, I think was absolutely a huge mistake on whether it was the ZBA or...
Was that a planning board thing, Eliza?
I think it's the ZBA because it is in zoning.
Yeah.
Signs are in zoning, but typically, we on the planning board typically don't deal with them very much because they don't go on site plans, right, typically. And so if you want relief from zoning, that's what the ZBA is for. So typically if you need an exception for a sign, you go to the ZBA.
Pretty sure it was the ZBA.
And then it's just a box on the plan that we get.
Yeah.
But something like that, it wasn't a surprise to the developers or the market basket people or anybody. And to all of a sudden do that, there are a lot of other businesses that are further away from the road that now, if they wanted to, could get the same thing.
Okay, well, that's John Colbath. Why don't you give your email so John Colbath can write you? John's the ZBA chair. Hey, Rob, could you put up the other photo we have? Does anybody know where this is? And it's not Dover.
It's probably
and it's not
behind
Portsmouth.
TJ Maxx, right?
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So it doesn't look like Conway, and it's that was taken
From any angle.
Any angle, and it's but it answers. And Eliza, you've been involved with housing forever. Is there any reconciliation between? That's not ugly. It's just they're going to be 200. That's only half of it. There's another on the other side. There's another structure, or duplexes or apartments that size. Does that fit in North Conway? Should the planning board have any authority over that? I think they're going to be very attractive buildings. They're going to have a clubhouse and a swimming pool and all that. Chris, what do you think? And we need housing.
So I think one of the problems, and one of the problems with the housing is we've done things with the zoning which have tried to facilitate housing, and we haven't been getting housing that helps families in town and young families and the elderly necessarily live. So things like this provide housing that's needed, but they don't help younger families gain wealth or get into the market. There are a lot of rentals. So we reduce the zoning areas. People put up apartments. There's no there's no smaller homes being built that people can move into. I know when my son, who you know, moved in, he bought his first house up here for $165,000. My other son came up here, bought his house for $255,000. Those both sold, 3 or 4 years later for $400,000. That's beyond the entry point of most people who are starting out. And this kind of housing that you're seeing here isn't going to help those people. And those are the people more so that I want to help, so that you can build a community so that people can grow up through it. And there needs to be a way to do that.
But you
where,
can make
where
an
there's
argument.
actual ownership. So some of these density issues, I think, need to be made only for people who are living long-term and are living in the community.
But these are, I'll defend that development, and I think anybody who sees housing as an issue, they're 1 and 2 bedroom, there's high density, 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. Maybe it's not for a family of 5, but certainly gives a lot of single people and couples, and that's a start.
I don't disagree with you, but those are, I assume, are rentals.
Yes.
So it doesn't give them much of a start, given what I've seen the rental rates to be. They're probably more than most people want to pay for.
Yeah, what do you think of that place?
Well, I would agree with Chris. I think that regardless of the building or what it looks like or anything like that, we have a huge housing crisis, as do a lot of communities. And to have that many apartments, and they're not the only ones. There's other developments that are already there that say, yeah, we'll do 30%, whatever the terms are called for low-income people and whatnot, affordable housing. They're not. They're just not. And are we policing it? No.
This is a little off topic, Eliza, but does that help? By definition, that has to help the housing situation, a complex like that.
Yeah, so I believe the restrictions that were put on that development that have also been on a lot of the housing that's come through they're restricted and they're required to be long-term rentals. They do not necessarily have an affordability restriction. There have been some developments like Avesta that have affordability restrictions, but they don't all have cost restrictions for what people will be charged. They usually are just required to be long-term rentals, meaning that, it has to serve the market of people that are living and working here. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're affordable at every, price point. I do think that there was at the time that project was approved, was very clear data that there was not enough rental inventory. So that is filling a need that existed at the time it was being built. It is a lot of units though. We're not a huge town. So I don't know what the level of ongoing need is for rental apartments when we total up, all the rental apartments that maybe, are being built or are going to be built in the next 5 years. I definitely think there's probably now a much bigger need for starter homes and single family homes, which I agree with Chris. I think we want to see community members actually being able to buy something, being able to build wealth, just being part of the community in that more permanent way. So I do think it serves a need. I think the fact that that picture is surprising to look at means we're not all looking at it every day driving 16. So I actually do think it's fairly well, not to say that it needs to be hidden per se, but I think the idea that we actually have that level of density close to, grocery stores and amenities and the strip, but we are not necessarily all staring at it is not the worst thing. Because, you do want to drive down the road and look at the mountains and drive by small businesses. Driving by Walmart doesn't get me out of bed in the morning, right? So, but the nature here does. So I do think that it is a balance. We have to fill needs, and I think the long-term local needs are the most important, but I don't think that we're not necessarily serving the community by building that 10 times over just because people need somewhere to live. I think we need to serve everybody's different needs, but I do think there's very clear data that showed there was a need for that. And you do see people that are like, well, they want to come here for a job or whatever, but whether they take that job probably is going to come down to whether they can get a rental to move into at their start date. That doesn't necessarily mean they want to live in that rental for the next 10 years, but it is small rentals that tend to get people to being available and having the inventory that anybody who gets a job at a small business or at a nonprofit being able to be like, okay, I can at least go live here for a year and I can get to my start date on time is going to make a big difference. For me, I feel like I've heard a lot, and I am like in the housing space, and I have young kids and in school, so I do hear a lot from the young people that it's like it's impossible to, like, you list a job, even if you find people, it's really hard to get people to move here for jobs. They're very intimidated by the housing market, the lack of rentals, and all of that. And I think that's a big piece of economic growth here.
Well, I mean, it's, I guess there are like 600 or 700 housing units, one form or another, coming online in the next few years, which is a lot. I always think of, because that's back at TJ Maxx, which is the old drive-in back there, and there's that one little road that comes out. So I think, boy, at 8 o'clock in the morning, when there's 100 cars, is that our next Rotary? You know, but anyway.
There is another entrance exit for that development.
around the other side with it.
Yes.
Speaking of affordable housing, and Ridgeline has, as we know, it's a huge project and it's multifaceted, and it's got the rentals, and now they have the homes, single-family homes. And if you talk to a builder, you can't build anything for less than $600,000 or $700,000. But I did notice on the homes, not the little rental units, but the homes, which are marketed like for $750,000, like in the little cul-de-sac where they are, they have granite curbing. And I know granite curbing is really expensive. So I guess my question is, should the planning board be a little more relaxed with something like that, which we know just adds to the site costs?
I think that this comment is going to be with the caveat, this is very case by case, but I also think one thing I really worry about, especially with things that are meant to be sold on the open market to people who might be looking for something that might be relatively affordable, not saying that those homes are affordable, but just as a general comment, that you can get yourself in a lot bigger trouble having things get severely damaged because they were not built right, and then having an astronomical cost you have no ability to handle on a property that's now devalued by whatever happened. So, you know, road washing out, driveways washing out, big things like that have happened to people in town in the last few years.
And that's the idea of the granite curbing.
And it's for, yeah, I mean, a lot of it is for like not damaging things with plowing, but it has also to do obviously with how the drainage works and all of that. And so I think that I think it's just good to keep in mind that like everything's a trade-off, and sometimes paying more to do something right is going to save you money in the long run. And ultimately, like something that scares me about things we approve that are going to then get sold on the open market is, are we letting somebody be sold something that is going to flood or fall apart, or the foundation's going to shift because it's actually like a wetland or that's not filled properly? Like, I don't know.
Hey, what do you
I
think
worry
about that
that
kind of stuff?
Well, I think you just changed my mind a little bit, Eliza. I would have said, well, you know, green looks nice, and do we actually need the curbing? But your point of down the road, you know, anything you approve is going to be sold. Sooner or later, it's going to be sold. And so we should be protective of the value, the overall value of whatever it is, and you know, the deterioration if we didn't do it right the first time or tried to stick to the rules. So I guess I would think if the rules say curbing, then I would say we ought to put curbing in, even though it adds to the cost, but it's a relative low add compared to the whole whatever.
Chris, are there any ways you can make it less expensive to build affordable housing? I mean, we know the...
Well, let's go back to the curbing. You let me answer that question.
Okay,
first.
well...
So I've worked on projects in the past, affordable housing projects, not here, where we have waived the granite curbing. In one case, we got a sidewalk down a busy road to a school that was constructed in lieu of that. So there's ways, in my mind. In another one, we got another sidewalk built, and we got a bus stop put in, and we got a few other things. We got a rail trail built, a rail trail, like a mile of rail trail. So we trade off granite curbing in areas where I don't think it's necessarily needed. And again, that goes back partly to your waiver question. When you have a set of regulations that are just generic, you need to look on a case-by-case basis as to whether you're getting your money's worth out of that. I hate to see people spend money on something if they can spend it on something better. That's better for the town, better for the community, better for the people who live there. Varies case by case. I don't mind having the regulations there, but I don't want anybody to do anything that doesn't make sense, that isn't cost effective, I want things to be done strategically, and that's part of what I've always done. It ticked me off when I was an engineer, when I had to do stupid stuff for town regulations, and it ticked me off when I was working for a town and when I was on the planning board, if people were spending money that was wasteful. So that's sort of an answer to that first part of the question. So now your next question was...
Well, you kind of well, I mean, again, it's one of those wide open questions of what can be done to make housing more affordable, or starter homes more affordable.
So the things that can be done are, number one, density. So we've waived density on things like that, which aren't really helping make, people get starter homes. They'll help for the rental. And again, I'm not opposed to those necessarily, but they're not doing what we want. So I think we need to try and get a focus on things. So smaller areas, cluster development can reduce infrastructure costs. I disagree with what the planning board's done with cluster. I hate to say this, but they've tied environmental things that are environmentally good with increased density, which isn't always a good idea. So, for instance, if you have an area next to the river that's failing septic systems, you bring sewer down there. I think the way we had a big discussion on this, the board, I think, passed something where if you have sewer, you can have an increased density. You clearly don't want an increased density next to the river. If there's a problem already, you want to have the sewer there for environmental protections, which brings us back to what we talked about before. You need to separate the zoning issues from the infrastructure issues a little bit. Otherwise, you end up with not having sense in some areas. So there are things you can do infrastructure-wise, narrower roads, no granite curbing. In where I work, we go to the HDPE piping instead of concrete piping. Is a lot cheaper. You could do open catch basins let them use swales in natural areas instead of having to build an area. You can work with the site more to cut down costs. A lot of times it's a site-specific thing, and it involves a lot of flexibility and a lot of waivers again. But it involves thinking. It involves the staff stepping forward, stepping up, looking at a site and saying, look, if you do this, this, and this, can we get more affordable housing? Can we keep the prices down? Can you keep the houses smaller? And it involves developers who are willing to do that with you as well, which is tough to get. So I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying anything's done anything wrong, but there are ways to help get that done, which if all parties are working together, I think you can get to a solution if necessary.
We're running out of time here, but
sorry,
no, it's very good. I got to ask about the rec path. So I know the rec path is a selectmen's thing, and it's hard to keep track whether they support it or not. But my first question is does the planning board have anything to do with the rec path? And I guess that's to you, Eliza.
I don't know that I know the answer to that question. I think I would like for the planning board to be given at a certain point where there is an existing plan that is mostly complete, that is a viable path forward, meaning that they have the easements, they have the money, things are organized. I would love for the planning board to be consulted and presented to, and for us to be able to give feedback. I appreciate that. I think because things are very up in the air, that there's been some effort to keep us updated. Like Steve is on the committee, the Selectmen's Committee.
Steve Porter?
Porter is on the Selectmen's Committee for the rec path, so he reports out at our meetings. I think that's plenty of update for now.
But the planning board doesn't have any real jurisdiction over it.
Statutorily, we are supposed to have at least one hearing on the plan. I think that my understanding is that because in general this conceptual phase 2 has gone to the planning board, even though it was long enough ago that I think Steve was the only planning board member that was there that is currently on the board. Right. I think we all feel like we should have a chance to give feedback, but I think the town feels that fulfilled that requirement. But I honestly don't know. I just think that if we want to do a community initiative, we should be giving more opportunities for feedback.
Do you personally support the rec path, the extension?
I don't even know what it is at this point.
Well, I can tell you. Go some Cranmore interview.
But they don't have easements. They don't have money. Like, I guess I
Are you going to vote? I'm putting you on the spot here, obviously, but
You
there's
can.
actually going to be something to vote on the town warrant this year. Are you going to vote for it or against it?
I don't feel that there's enough due diligence done for me to show up to an election and vote in favor of the project that does not have complete due diligence. But I would love to see the rec path expanded. I love the rec path. It's great. I am genuinely confused as to what is going on at all times.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Now, Ao, you're the only person who's going to ask this, and I'm going to ask you about the rec path in general. But the mythology is about whether Chubby Whitaker gave that land to the town. And it was your dad, Chet, the story that I know the story, and you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, is that Chubby did not give that land. And in fact, it was your dad that kind of talked him into it. You could say that in a good way, to say, look, Chubby, you don't have any heirs, sell it. What's the story?
I'd say that was pretty much the story. And he sold it. It was not a gift. It was sold at market value at the time. And I actually probably was one of the few people that still alive that have met Chubby, myself, and have been there, and 2 or 3 times in his back kitchen where the newspapers were piled up, and as he was reaching his later age. Wonderful man. He just wanted to be able to, everybody to be able to use that land rather than it being developed. And I know that there's legal stuff that I haven't seen that people argue about, well, you know, he had specific wants and stuff like that. From my perspective, he just wanted it to be accessible to everybody and anybody. And I think to, you know, pick over whether you're going to pave a path or do something like that, he didn't have any idea, whatever, 50, 60 years ago, what world would be like. He just wants it to be free and, you know, to still be there instead of developed. That was his biggest thing.
Do you think the rec path, even with the little spur or a part of it that's paved, do you think that fits that vision? Not that we owe anything to Chubby, he sold the land, but...
I don't think it would bother him a bit.
Right. Do you support the rec path?
I do.
Chris, what do you think about the rec path? And I realize it's not even a planning thing. I'm just asking. I'm just putting you on the spot.
In general, I support a rec path, and I think if you're going to build one, you might as well pave it, because I think it's stupid not to.
Yeah. All right, last question.
You got it.
We're 10 to 15 years down the road. What do you think this valley's going to look like? In general. Is it better? Is it just, I mean, I think we've been here long enough, so, you know, there was someone that said to me, I can't believe this place, you know, it's gone to hell. And he moved here like in 2009, you know, and I said, well, the people in 2000 said it was going to hell when the big boxes came, but you're okay with the big boxes. Now you're worried about a couple of hotels. So it's always relative, right?
Yep.
And it seems like we're ready for, I mean, we had the hotel bump and we had the big box bump and we had the condo boom in the 80s, I guess. And now we're going to have a little bit of a housing boom. How is that, maybe put it this way, how is it going to change the valley? What are we looking at in 10 to 15 years?
I mean, I would love to just see us to have a phase now of maybe some good infrastructure stuff, like more sidewalks, more connected paths, just more, there's going to be more people. So I'd like to see, and you know, some more amenities, like having a pool for the community is great. I think it would be wonderful to just have a community that is able to actually, you know, be connected. I feel like we're all stuck in our cars on 16, and I don't love that. You know, I think it would be really nice to see us have some sustained growth that fits within what people want to see for the community, you know, physically what it looks like, meaning not, you know, not too big or not too many boxes if we don't want boxes, you know, maybe a little smaller scale. But I'd love to see more walkability, connectability, paths. I'd love to see rec path expansion so that people can use that to get around town on bikes or whatever. So I think we've got a lot of stuff, and I think we're missing some like really community amenities that I would love to see us have.
I was just thinking that in 20 years, Ao and Chris, Eliza may be the only one to see it.
Yeah, I only have to worry about the next 10 years.
Ao, what do you think in 15 or 20 years?
I think 15, 20 years, it's going to be great. I think that the saving grace for this valley is that we are surrounded by White Mountain National Forest and individuals and other groups that have saved land, have conservation easements on their land, and that's going to save us. And everything else is up for grabs. And so it will be whatever it is. And there are going to be more people. And I always gave my father a hard time when he talked about more people coming. And I would remind him, if people just stopped having so many babies, I come from a family of 8. So I gave him a hard time about that.
Chris, what do you think? 20 years, is this going to be a better place or just more stuff that we don't want?
I'm hopeful that it would be a better place. I'm hopeful that expansion will be done in an environmentally sensitive manner. I'm hopeful that a meals tax will go through so that we can get money from some of the commercial
Oh gosh.
development in town, that we can improve things in the schools and the infrastructure. There's seems to be a lack of money coming to the town from a lot of industrial development, which I think the state is stopping from happening. And I don't want to get into politics here, but I've seen things done better. You move into a town with a big commercial base, it'd be nice to get some money from that so the residents don't have to foot the bill for all the improvements that are required to it. But if there was some extra money in town, all the things that you wanted could come to fruition. And I think that would make the town better, and I think that would help all the businesses in town. And I think that if we pass environmentally sensitive ways to expand residential growth, we can get affordable housing and upper end housing as well, and still preserve the trails and the woods and the wetlands and the water quality. And it can be done. It's going to involve people working together, and I'm hopeful.
All right.
I'm always hopeful.
Well, good. I think this is, for dry old planning stuff, it's been very informative and even a little entertaining. And I think the highlight was, you talking about your dad with the Shelby Whitaker, and we can put that myth to rest. So Chris, Eliza, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.